Okay, hi everybody, welcome to the talk. Okay, to start off, I'd like to invite you to close your eyes for a moment, take a couple of deep breaths, and just start by listening. In 1977, a recording of Liu Shui, as performed by Guan Pinghu, was selected by China to be included in the Voyager Golden Records. The Voyager Golden Records are gold-plated gramophone records containing music and images from around the world to portray the diversity of life and culture on Earth. It was sent into outer space by NASA on the Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 spacecraft. It is intended for any intelligent extraterrestrial life forms or for future humans who may find them. The language of music is already leading the way into space. And the reason why this is relevant is because the music you're listening to is being played on the qin, more commonly known as the gu qin, gu meaning old, classical, of antiquity, and qin meaning a string instrument. The gu qin is the oldest classical Chinese instrument with over 3,000 years of history. Please also allow me to share a quote from the Shuogua to further illustrate my point as to why something that is so classical is also very relevant to space. Here, where this is actually the Ba Gua, and it is from this book called the Shuogua, which means Shuo means to utter, to speak, and Gua means like a trigram, like that. And what it is from a 3rd century BC text, and it's a wing of the I Ching, which is the classic of change, which is the oldest classical text that we know in Chinese history. And what this thing is illustrating here is telling us about the creation of the universe. And there's a quote in there about looking backwards in time as well. And so what it says here is like 天地定位. So the earth and the heavens, they find their position. And 山泽通气, where the mountain and the marsh, they connect with the vital qi. The thunder and wind, they come together and they manifest the 10,000 things. Fire and water do not mutually discharge each other but hold their positions. And the 8 dimensions of space is established in the inner realms as placeholders. And the last 3 phrases here are actually really important, where it says, 数王者顺, the many or the masses follow the flow of time, and 知来者逆, those who know go against the flow and look backwards in time. 是故易逆数也. This is why to understand the wisdom of change, one needs to go backwards towards our cosmic footprints and to understand change. This is also, like, I interpret this passage with the help of my teacher, Michael Givens, from his translations. And so to start us off, let me give you some definitions by what I mean by classical Chinese medicine and what I mean by space. So classical Chinese medicine, why classical? Why not traditional? Why not other forms of medicine? Why specifically classical Chinese medicine? Well, one of the main things is because classical Chinese medicine is mostly symbol science. And what do I mean by symbol science? It is something that, let me see here. It is the art of synthesizing the manifold layers of reality into one single crystal of meaning. What are these manifold layers of reality? So they would be the layers of reality like the form, how things that we can touch, look, and feel. The other layer of reality would be like the function, how they work, and then also its relationship to the macrocosmic universe, the time and space, its resonances. And what they focus on a lot is on like the relationship and mapping the interaction of these processes. So they're trying to study something that's living. Whereas the current model of medicine that we have is not bad, it's really required, but there is an emphasis more on what I call the materialist reductionist model, which means to say that they focus more on studying just the form of things, what can be seen, touched, or measured. So in that case, it's a smaller lens compared to what classical Chinese medicine is, or the classical form of medicine, which looks at all the different forms of reality. And not just that, but that they also encode it in a language where, today we still have access to it. Also, another difference is that, in the modern form of medicine, it looks at the machine as the sum of its parts. And the idea is that if we know all these different parts, if we know all these different chemical constituents, we would know the entire bit. But Chinese medicine is looking at it, or the classical perspective is looking at it where the sum of its parts, it's not going to be just the entire thing. The totality is more than the sum of its parts. And so those two are very different concepts as well to start from and to look from. Let me give some example to illustrate what I'm trying to say. So this is a quote from a text from 200 BC, the Huangdi Neijing, which is the main text that we use in classical Chinese medicine. And so it usually comes in like a question and answer format. And the questioner is usually the yellow emperor. And the person who answers is usually Qi Po, one of his advisors in court. And so the yellow emperor asks, the 5 Zhang organ resonates with the 4 time-space dimension. What do each of them receive or resonate with? So from this question, we can see how they're trying to understand. The Zhang organs are actually the spleen and the different parts of our body parts, specifically some organs in Chinese medicine. And they're trying to understand that from the perspective of its resonance with the greater cosmic environment. And so Qi Po actually gives a very detailed answer. And he said, from the east, the color is green, and the qi of the east enters the liver, and it opens through the eyes. The jing is stored in the liver. So it goes on to describe its associated flavor. It's sour. The environmental manifestation of what you can see are the grass and trees. Even the animal is chicken. So you can see how it goes down all the way to a lot of detail. And then it goes right out again, and the resonant star is Jupiter. It resonates with springtime, and the part of the body is the head. And it even talks about the sound being jiao, and that the number is 8. And it's related to the sinews. And even the smell. So you can see from this text here, it's showing us how this many folds of reality is being linked together in like a signifier in what we can see around us, the seasons or the trees or our own organs, what we can experience. So it's talking something from a very cosmological level to something that's really practical that you can feel and taste and touch. And that, to me, is the value of the model of classical Chinese medicine as a model of medicine. Here's another example of my notes, because I want to illustrate how, it's still very relevant today as what we are practicing in herbal medicine. So over here, this is from the periphery, and this is again from the Shu Wen chapter 5, and it's the treatise on the archetypal resonances of yin and yang, and I'll talk a bit more about yin and yang later. But from the east, from the periphery, from the east it comes in, and then it manifests as the winds, and then it manifests as wood. The taste is sour, it goes into the liver, and it shows in the eyes. And then it goes into the sinews, and then from the sinews it goes into the heart. So again, this is like the whole cosmological model. And the heart is associated with fire, with heat, and the taste is bitter, and it goes into the blood. And then it goes to earth, and then it's associated with the spleen, and things like that. So it goes on, and we can understand with the taste and flavors anchored in there, we can understand them in terms of herbs. So like, for example, this is what we learn about herbs with the different tastes and the flavors, with sweet being associated with an earth quality, with pungent being associated with the metal quality. And then we also learn about its function and its action. With something that tastes, pungent, what it does in our body is that it scatters the qi and things like that. So we can see again how it's bringing in all these movements into our bodies, into our understanding of humans and our metabolism. So, the relationship between space and form and time and function. And this is one of the reasons why, even today, Chinese medicine is really relevant. A lot of diseases that are recalcitrant, that modern medical science would say, no, there's nothing wrong with you. Lyme's disease doesn't exist because we cannot find anything, that tells us in your blood or any chemical reactions that, tell us that there's something wrong. But the person feels there's something wrong. And then that's how Chinese medicine comes in, because we have different lenses to see and to understand the processes of the body that's not just at the form level. And again, how, because it's this whole integrated system, right, it's all applied to everything. So like if we got to hear the qin music at the beginning, that's a picture of the qin. And it's the same cosmological model where each string resonates with each element, the earth, metal, wood, fire, water. The same words and the same system is used to look at climatology studies, like what kind of pestilence might come this year, or, what's the qi? Would it be more hot this year? Would there be, things happening? We use that model to look at climatology studies. We use it to make our calendars. We use it in medicine. It's the same root of studies, and it's just different application. And it's still being used today. I think that's really valuable. So moving on to space. So space, what do I mean by space? It's such a general word. So space could mean being in a spacecraft, like in a space station right now, orbiting Earth on the ISS, International Space Station. Space could mean being colonizers of a planet in our solar system, like being in Mars. Interplanetary travel, so like traveling from Earth to Mars and back, takes about 7 months now. I think that's the latest research. Or it could mean interstellar travel, where interstellar means that you are traveling outside of our own solar system, outside of our own sun. So I think I read some research like there are like maybe like 5,000 interstellar, 5,000 suns around. But that would be 2,000 exoplanets. So what this is telling us, though, that those travel would be a really long time. And, there would be the generation that knew Earth when they got onto the aircraft and to the spacecraft. And then the generation that does not know Earth and would never get to the planet. And then the generation that will know the planet, and then the generation that will grow up in the planet but no longer know Earth. So I guess to me, maybe this is what I mean by space. Or right now, all of this is kind of put into the term space. And just something to think about there. So if I wake up one morning and I'm in any of those situations I mentioned earlier, and I look out into space, or I don't really know Earth anymore, what would I want to know, or what would I want to have been in my spacecraft with me? What would my questions be? What would I want my parents to tell me? These are just questions that I think about, and that I think it's important, because we're kind of like looking back and planning, right? Like, okay, we are right now at this stage where space travel, we are in space, that's a fact. Space travel is happening, Now is the time where we need to decide what we want to pack with us, how we want to bring it there, what kind of technology we want to develop, So when we are inheritance of that, Or from Earth. If I wake up on Earth one day and stare out into space and know that all this traveling is available to me, or that there are people traveling out there, how would that change my worldview? Like before airline travel happened, I grew up in this place, but now I know I can fly to America and I can live there. How would that be different? What would my thoughts be? And all of these things. I think human consciousness will remain the same, assuming that we have the right conditions to access our consciousness, that we are not too drugged out, too depressed, that we survive, but we're not just surviving, but we're thriving. I would be asking the same questions. What is my purpose in life still? Why am I here? What am I doing here? What do I want to do in the future? Like all these feelings and emotions about aspirations would still be the same if we are really talking about, putting human beings in space. So basically, I look at all of these things in the classics, in classical Chinese medicine, as process maps. So like we are navigating, we are going into the unknown, we're explorers. And what's important really is having all these maps that are guiding us into the unknown. We don't really need to know everything about the unknown. It wouldn't be called the unknown if we knew everything. But we want to have maps with us. We want to train our own ability to be able to know which maps to use when, and if a certain map is wrong, to correct it. And I think that that's the most important thing. And to me, all these things in the classics are maps, because they give us this encoded language about the various levels of reality in terms that we understand. So these are some examples. And my question is, how would these maps change when we're in space? Because they are so encoded with the term Earth, or the term, metal, or something like that. And what other new things would there be? Like, what is the word space in classical Chinese medicine? What is the word gravity in classical Chinese medicine? Just new concepts that we are experiencing now. But maybe it's not so new. Maybe we just need to know how to encode, like decode the message that's already in there, going by their qualities. So now I'll go a bit into the different maps, just very briefly, not all of them because there's too much to cover. But this is an example of the yin and yang symbol, which is the most basic in Chinese medicine, in Chinese thought and philosophy. And in the very basic level, yin means darkness and yang means light. And this is a picture of, the amount of light, the interaction of darkness and light that we can measure throughout the year with a gnomon stake, with summer solstice being the greatest amount of light and winter solstice being the least amount of light. And it's interesting that the symbol comes back out to being the same as yin and yang. But again, in classical Chinese medicine, it's not so much of looking at it just from the thing perspective, that this is a symbol. We want to look at what's most important is really the interaction between day and night. So the thing that moves in between them. And really wanting to understand that function. And so with just this, just thinking about space, would this still be relevant because the hours of daylight and the hours of night would be different? Like, how many sunrises are we going to see? How many sunsets are we going to see? So would that totally change yin and yang? And this is also about the circadian rhythm in our bodies. And then another map that I want to share today is this hollow map that my teacher, Dr. Heiner Fruhoff, came up with, and putting all these various levels of reality again, superimposed on yin and yang. Superimpose is not the right word, but again, a signifier of the symbolic language. So on the outer circle, you would see the Chinese skies, the constellations. And then here is the animal that's associated with that particular organ map, the I Ching symbols. So just these different layers of maps that are put on to understand different things, the time of the day, the moon, and the organ. So here. Again, how will these change? And so one thing I wanted to illustrate that's really interesting is how with summer solstice is the time of the greatest light. And just right here, Qian, that's the Gua, of the I Ching, which talks about the most amount of light as well. So it's not right at the zenith as we think it is, but it's really to the left of it. That's the greatest amount of time. So this allows us to see what we can see in nature, but also to see what is hidden in nature, what is the movement of things before they occur. And that's the whole cosmological science in Chinese medicine that's really useful. Again, the 5 phases and the 6 conformation. So in Chinese medicine, we usually study the rhythm of 5 and the rhythm of 6 together. We don't just take this as a thing, like wood is a thing, whatever. We want to study the relationship of the two. So the 6 conformations are what we call Tai Yin, Jue Yin, and Shao Yin. So the 3 yins, and then Tai Yang, Yang Ming, and Shao Yang. And then again, it sounds so complex and it can be used to describe so many complex concepts. But then again, it comes down to something really simple. It's basically, Shao Yang is during the period of sunrise, where, the Yang, Shao means small and Yang means sun, or where it's the start of the day where there are certain qualities where it's still kind of chilly because from the night before the earth absorbs all the, there isn't enough sun yet and it's still cold. So Shaoyang has certain qualities, and then right in the middle of the day when the sun is in the zenith, that would be Taiyang, when it's the hottest and the biggest and the brightest. And then there are certain qualities in that as well, And then when the sun sets, it goes into Yangming when the sun sets. And then it doesn't only map the sun cycle, but then it maps the yin cycle as well. And then it's used to illustrate a single day. It's used to illustrate a single year with all the various seasons. And it's used also to illustrate the various organs in our body, the gallbladder, the liver, the lung, and the intestines, because they have similar qualities. And then there is the association between the 6 conformations and the 5 elements. So like, for example, we would say, 决yin, wind, wood. So we would link wood with 决yin, and then we would be able to understand, the interaction and the cosmology between them. So in trying to understand the 5 elements, like wood is associated with gallbladder and liver. And wood is right at the bottom of the cycle, of the circle. So when I think about wood and gravity, it's like, so, what's the quality of wood, and how would wood change if you're in space? Like, for example, if the gravity in Mars is 1/3 of what it is here, how would the quality of wood change? How would the quality of wood change in our body? How would the functions of the gallbladder and liver change in our body? And subsequently, if that changes, it changes everything, and the way the different organs would interact as well. Or the quality of fire. Fire goes against gravity because fire burns upwards. So what's the function of fire, which is associated with the heart and the small intestine, that would be different when we're in space? And earth, that's really interesting. We call it earth, but in Chinese we call that tu, which could mean a lot of things, soil as well. But what are the qualities of earth? In the Huangdi Neijing, the Yellow Emperor asked Qi Po once, like, why is it that the earth is so heavy but it doesn't sink? Why is that? And Qi Po said, well, because the earth itself has a suspension quality. That's what earth is about. Earth holds things in place. Earth is solid in that way, but then it holds things in place, and that's a quality that the earth has. So the whole model of macrocosm and microcosm, if we humans are going into space, then are we carrying earth with us as well in our bodies? And something really interesting later, which I would share as we look at space medicine and what the astronauts are experiencing and how they are, associated with what we can see through these 5 elements. And water, what about water? Water is linked with the kidney, and water expresses gravity because water flows downwards, It's an expression of gravity. In space, you cannot really cry because your tears of water would react and behave differently. So then again, water is showing us gravity, or the expression of gravity. So each of these elements would have a different relationship with gravity. Metal, and you can take all these different words to have it at different levels of cosmology to look at. There's so much to talk about, and you can go on and on about it, and to get clues or hints, to see like, okay, what map would be useful to help me understand medicine and physiology so that we know the most life-giving medicine, the most sustainable solution. And then acupuncture point names. There are about 300 acupuncture point names with 12 channels. And like all of the other things that we've seen so far, they are not random. The names themselves are special codes that have symbolic meaning in relation to the other names in our body. And if the concept of macrocosm and microcosm is completely, in the medicine and in the worldview of things, then these are also clues to, symbols and clues to tell us how we can go into space with the best medicine that we have possible. So as an example of the acupuncture point name, this is Gong Sun, and Gong Sun is in the spleen channel here, and this is the point itself. And modern day people, we kind of look at the name and we use our current day concept, our ideas, our models of just more materialistic thinking to interpret the names. And we would think, okay, Gong means grandfather and Sun means, grandchild. So Gong Sun would mean grandfather, grandchild point. But really, what does that mean? I mean, people don't really bother going too much deeper into it, and they just want to make one layer of understanding of it. But when we go back and study the context of when this name was given, Gongsun was also the name of the Yellow Emperor, So that means that this is a pretty powerful point. And sometimes what this tells us is that it's also maybe a point of knowing your identity or your lineage, because the Yellow Emperor is like our, it's like the emperor of the human lineage in a way. You can say that as well. So this point can be used for people that have infertility problems. It can be used for people who have mania problems, who like mental illness that stem from not knowing your place in the world, or not knowing your lineage, not knowing where you come from. So stimulating this point will help with addressing all these issues at the same time. Another thing that's interesting about acupuncture points as well is that it addresses both the pathology and the physiology. If there's an excess or there's a deficiency, the same point will help with both, because, because it's the way it is, or, so that's an example of this. And I'm thinking, well, if I'm in space and I want to know where I'm coming from, where my lineage is, I like to have this point stimulated for sure. Maybe put it like in a spacesuit, or when I'm in a space bed or something. Like these points, they're on our bodies, they're there. Just use them maybe. Another idea that came to me was, channel pathways when you're in the womb, because kind of being in the womb somehow it's similar to being in space in some ways, where you are not, where your experience with gravity might be kind of different because you're in an amniotic sac, So maybe there's some reduced gravity there, or when you're in diving in deep sea or something. How does our physiology work from a Chinese medicine perspective in those cases? In extreme conditions, there's this good book by Dr. Kevin Fong, who does space medicine, and he talks about that, but from a Western medicine perspective in extreme conditions, what happened to explorers and things like that. So I want to understand it from the Chinese medicine perspective, because that's going to teach me how I can change my map. And then now moving on to space medicine. Okay. So the longest single space flight record is held by Valery, a former Russian cosmonaut. And cosmonaut's the same as astronaut, just cosmonaut is the Russian term for astronaut, and astronaut's the NASA term. It's a little over 14 months that he's been in space. And then when we study the issues of what we know now of space problems, that people coming back from space, there are issues of weightlessness. So this is what they call space adaptation syndrome. Usually it's just within the first couple of days of being in space, they would have motion sickness, nausea, vomiting, headaches, lethargy. Current treatment that they have, some medicines, mitrodrone, whatever, and to make sure that they don't vomit in spacesuits, which I heard could be fatal. I don't know if that's true. And in Chinese medicine, we have points that can treat that. We would say when you vomit or you have nausea, it's probably the qi that is having a counterflow. So we want to bring the qi down. But we also want to know why the cause of the nausea, the vomiting. Could it be something that's Shaoyang related? So we would have points for that. From the 1,000 Ducat formulas, which is like a Tang Dynasty text or something. So there are things that can be helpful for that. Space adaptation syndrome. Another interesting thing as well too is the fluids in the body would kind of like be up in the upper parts of the body, and then it would go down. And so understanding fluid physiology of astronauts as well would be helpful. And then there's fluid physiology in Chinese medicine that we understand as well. More long-term loss would be like bone density loss and muscle atrophy. So loss of 20% of muscle mass in 5 to 10 days. And this is interesting because in space, there is a change in the bone metabolism where the osteoblast and osteoclast activities are different. And in Chinese medicine, the bone is known as, the bone and the brain, they're associated and they're known as the sea of marrow. And the marrow in Chinese medicine is linked with the kidney, the kidney system. So the kidney system is linked with water. And so we want to look at, what made those changes? Why is the physiology not working? What is the interactions between blood and qi in the body that is causing this deficiency or causing this imbalance? And we don't need to give a drug or anything. We would do something. We would give a point. We would use herbs. We would do something to rebalance it and not give it another chemical substance to do that. So, but we need to know the cause, and we need to look at the map. Current treatment for that: diet, exercise, medication. So when I did this research and I started looking at this, I realized that really even space medicine or biomedicine didn't really have a solution as well. We are equally like not knowing why that's the case, and the application of what we want to do is, we just look at what we have. Like, is it the diet? Is it medication, more exercise? Like, they are equally clueless as we are about space. And I feel that there's a lot of contribution that classical Chinese medicine can bring to this if we all put our brilliant minds into solving these problems and then presenting these solutions. So muscle atrophy, that's really interesting because muscle in Chinese medicine is linked with the flesh, which is linked to earth. And so muscle atrophy would make complete sense from a Chinese medicine perspective if we are away from earth and we no longer have the same kind of mechanism that's running in our body. And then how do we treat muscle atrophy? We go onto the Yang Ming channel. We go, there are ways of treating muscle atrophy right here on Earth right now. And so this is how we can contribute. Sleep, And then sleep is really interesting too. So the circadian desynchronization, like I was saying earlier, the whole yin and yang model, ISS orbits Earth every 1.5 hours, which means to say that the astronauts, they experience 16 sunrises and 16 sunsets per day. Imagine what that would do. I mean, they try to sleep, in the dark and using mask or shift rotation or that kind of stuff. Sure, but that's at the physical level. But at the energetic level, what's your body, really doing? Being communicated with, the amount of sunrise and sunset, how it's functioning, how would that change, and how can we find a solution for that? In another, research that I done here in 2011, there was a 16-month mock Mars mission that they did in Moscow to study the effects of people that are kind of like in a spacecraft for 17 months, and they get into like a prolonged funk. That's what they said. People are like they couldn't sleep. They try and squirrel themselves into the most private nooks. So these are just effects on the psychology of things. But I would argue that it's going to be very different in space too, because in space the energy, the chi is different. 50% of space astronauts are taking sleeping pills and still getting 2 hours of sleep or less. So same thing, we have points for insomnia. We have herbs that would help with insomnia, but then again, we want to know what's the cause, and then we would know the right herbs to give. So future directions and applications. So like doing the research again, I found out that NASA made an announcement recently that it's going to have human beings living and working on Mars in colonies entirely independently in 2030. That's really close by to now. SpaceX is going to send colonizers to Mars, like even earlier than that. So I'm going to graduate in 2018. That's 2 more years from 2020, and 2030 is really close by. I mean, we're going to see it in our lifetimes. Our children are going to be part of people with such options of being in space. If we don't, get on this topic right now and start thinking about it, by the time it happens, like any other technologies, internet or whatever, then it's too late because the main power structures are already in place, and your chance of trying to affect change would become harder and harder. It's, space exploration is not just about technology. It's not just going to be about cosmonauts and astronauts anymore. It's going to be about communities. So it's going to be about you and me. It's going to be about people that are in this room that's right here, right now. What kind of world do we want to bring there? What kind of consciousness? Anything, like for me, I'm not an astrophysics physicist or anything, but I come from where I am. So I'm interested in meditation. I'm interested in healing. I grew up in Singapore, so I'm bilingual. I saw that there is this whole library of classical Chinese texts that's not yet been translated, and so I do that, and that's my contribution. And this is, I just got curious. Many people ask me, like, how do you come up with this idea, how do you get curious? And I just got curious, and I just started thinking about these questions. And I really believe in Chinese medicine because it's what I use, it's what I see, it's what I do. I'm a Qin player, so this is where I contribute, and I think it's the same with everyone. If you're good with woodworking, if you're good in farming, that's where you need the technologies to bring to space as well. Space travel is also time travel, I feel, in some ways. Because when you look at a star, you're actually seeing a star that has been traveling through time. And if we're going into space, then we are traveling through time in some ways. And when I look back and I think about what my ancestors, what I would have liked them to preserve, and what I'm benefiting today because of what was preserved, I feel very lucky, and I want to think about the future in that way. The metaphors, the context may be completely different now from like Han Dynasty period, but then again, it's still really relevant because they're helping us heal problems that, diseases that modern medical science do not have answers to. So they're relevant and they're irrelevant. And I think that would be the same 2,000 years from now if we chart our course carefully. People in space may not, or people who are living in an exoplanet may not know Earth, and the terms that we use may not be fully relevant to them anymore. But then it would still be relevant because they would still be human beings. They would still be living in a body. They would still be asking the same questions, So I see that as being the paradox of things, where it doesn't mean that if times have changed, that things are no longer relevant anymore. Yeah, and to just use them in really practical ways. I want to also say that another reason why I feel comfortable stepping out to talk about this, because when I first brought up this topic with my teachers and friends in school, a lot of people in my field, at least, medicine, earth-based medicine, natural, going with the cycles and the seasons, everybody is feeling very attached to Earth and feeling like, no, we don't want to go into space. That's like ridiculous. We are on Earth. And so I got a lot of kind of pushback, and that made me keep it really quiet for a long time, and just to keep it, quiet. But then I felt really lucky to meet Dr. Cameron Smith, who is here with us today, at one of the talk at the astrology in OMSI. And I brought up my idea about Chinese medicine in space with him, and he was the first person that didn't laugh at my idea and thinks that it's exciting and interesting. And at that time, I was still very general, and I didn't have much ideas, and there was not much that I could bring because it's such a big topic. But just holding that, keeping that idea going year after year, just kind of feels like it's important to bring it out. And this time around, this year, now I feel like more people are interested, so that's a good thing. And I would like to encourage more people to bring, put their contribution into it. And I created like a space holder just as a website where I'm going to try and publish this talk, ChineseMedicine.space, to just get people talking, to just continue to kind of keep this as a hobby, but a really important hobby, to just move in that direction. So it's about communities. Yeah, and my talk is done. Thank you. I have about 10 minutes for questions if you have any. I'll be happy to try and answer, or any ideas.
What do you think some of the barriers will be for the mainstream push to use Chinese medicine in this new advancement space? I think, if I'm correct, Chinese medicine is just a way to record the ancient traditions that come from many cultures. But I think there's an idea maybe by some people that don't understand or know enough about it, that maybe, this is meant for the general population. So how do you see that barrier being overcome? How can you make this an idea that's outside of just maybe some astrology and some Chinese medicine scholars thinking about the concept, but how do you push it to the
Mainstream. Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think that for me, it's what I was talking earlier about the different models of medicine, and how our pervasive idea of the mainstream idea of medicine right now is what we can see and measure, and not giving enough credence to symbol science, or understanding what is encoded in messages that can talk about many different levels of reality. To me, when I talk about Chinese medicine, it's really close to quantum physics in a sense. I'm not a quantum physicist, but I read a lot on that topic, and how this thing about the holographic universe, or the fractals, or this different science that we are trying to learn right now. And in Chinese medicine, for thousands of years, we've been using holomaps, how this part of the body is a representation of this part of the body. And in quantum physics, sometimes one thing that I read about was how they say to try and unite the two theories, of Einstein as well as quantum theory, is to look at it as where the background is changing, but not the physical object itself. So to me, that's like symbol science. That's it's what's already been, taught to us in the classics and that we are practicing today, but it's not yet being recognized because we are still more focused on just the physical aspect of what can be measured and understanding the parts so we can try and understand the sum of the whole thinking. So I think to me that's the biggest barrier to bringing Chinese medicine into space. Or again, it's time travel. So whatever we're trying to do for space, we're also trying to do for it here and now. And the more successful we can do it here and now, the more successful we could probably be for space. Maybe, I don't know. But if it's a community thing as well, I feel that, if there's enough people who, from the ground up, say that this is the kind of medicine that we want to bring because this is what our bodies are telling us, then there is more, power in that. Versus like if it's from the head of some authority in a hospital or a space medicine guy who, thinks that this is the main model and this is what we should only bring to space. Like I see that direction, the competition in that way. So again, what's open source, what's out there, what's like with hospitals in the past, main biomedical hospitals, they wouldn't have integrative clinic, they wouldn't have acupuncture, they wouldn't have herbs, in their hospitals. But when more people are asking for it, there became more integrative clinics. They start to accept more of these ideas into the mainstream medicine. But it's ground up. It's because they see the dollars behind that. And then this is what people would pay for, what insurance companies would pay for, and then this is what we would offer. So there is that whole system that I think we're working with. Any other questions? Or if there's anything that was unclear, I think I shared a lot.
Very interesting that you're asking how this system of understanding will have to be adjusted, or what more will it learn as we go through exoplanets. Very strange places well beyond human experience so far. And that's, I think, a great approach, because in many ways, alternative traditions will not want to know how they have to change. They will want to stay with a tradition, a particularly traditional ancient system. And of course, as we are exposed to new things, being ready to alter what we have been clinging to for 2,000 years, you wouldn't expect that particularly. So I think that's good.
That's an interesting point, actually, that you brought up, because maybe the reason why Chinese medicine is still around today and still being used and so much alive is because of that model that allows it to change.
So you would say there have been significant alterations through these 2,000 years?
Well, I mean, just in terms of how we humans have evolved and grown and changed, but yet the models are kind of still relevant, because the models themselves allows that change. Like I mentioned, the earliest classic that we have is the classic of change, and the quote about change and how we deal with change. So it's so amazing, because it means that we are well equipped to deal with change, which is great. I think it's probably the most powerful tool, But, okay, I think, is there any other questions or comments? No? All right, then I will end the presentation. Thank you.